It was just a phone call, one request, one tiny moment that cracked something deep inside me. "Can you take Lily this weekend? We've got a business trip," Rachel said. Her tone clipped, rehearsed, like I was her assistant and not her mother. I hesitated. My knees were still swollen. I had a doctor's appointment. "I can't this time," I said gently. There was silence, then coldness. Then came the message that stunned me more than any illness ever could. "We've changed the locks, don't come over." Just like that, decades of bedtime stories, hospital nights, homemade cookies, and silent sacrifices were erased. Not with anger, not with a fight, but with indifference. The kind that turns love into dust. And as I sat in my quiet kitchen, phone in hand, I realized this was not the end of my usefulness. It was the beginning of my return. I had just finished organizing the pill box for the week when the message lit up on my phone. It wasn't the first time Rachel had asked me to take Lily. In fact, it had become so routine I could predict the exact moment she'd call. Usually when Derek's job demanded a weekend away or she needed time to breathe. I loved Lily with every fiber of my being, but this time was different. My right knee had been throbbing for days, and the doctor finally had an opening. "I'm sorry, honey," I said softly. "I have a medical appointment I really can't miss." The pause on the other end wasn't just silence, it was judgment. I could feel it pouring through the phone like cold water down my back. Rachel's voice tightened. "So, you're saying your knee is more important than your granddaughter?" I started to explain, to reassure her, to offer a different day maybe, but she cut me off. "That's fine. We'll figure it out." Click. I stared at the phone, a pit growing in my stomach. Then, an hour later, the second message came. "We've changed the locks, don't come over." There was no discussion, no room for conversation, just a decision carved in concrete. I sat at the kitchen table for what must have been 30 minutes, my hands numb, my throat dry. I replayed the past decade like a slow, tragic film. Every moment I'd stepped in to help with Lily when they were overwhelmed. Every meal cooked when Rachel had postpartum depression. Every night spent rocking Lily back to sleep so they could rest. All of it discarded like an expired coupon. I stood, grabbed my coat, and drove to their house anyway. The neighborhood was still the same. Neatly trimmed lawns, recycling bins lined up in military precision, the sound of wind chimes brushing against the July breeze. I parked across the street and just watched. Their car was in the driveway. Lights were on in the kitchen. I walked up to the front door, already knowing what I'd find. The key turned halfway, then jammed. I tried again. Same result. I knocked. No answer. I texted, "I'm outside. Can we talk?" No reply. After 5 minutes, I turned to walk back to my car. As I did, the curtain on the second floor shifted ever so slightly. Someone was watching, and still, no one opened the door. As I drove home, a strange calm came over me. Not peace, no, not that, but a stillness, like the first second after a storm, where you don't yet know what's broken. Only that something is. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the locks on that door. Something else had closed too. Something much older, much deeper. I sat in the driveway for a long time after getting home, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. There was a half-finished scarf on the passenger seat, the one I'd promised to knit for Lily by autumn. I picked it up, fingers trembling, and realized I couldn't even remember the last time she called me Grandma, with that soft affection in her voice. Lately, it had been Evelyn. Like a distant relative you send a Christmas card out of obligation. Back inside the house, the silence was louder than usual. My home was small, modest, but filled with little echoes of them. Rachel's baby shoes framed in a shadow box, Lily's scribbled drawing stuck with magnets to the fridge. I stood in front of the refrigerator and slowly peeled one off. A stick-figure drawing of me and Lily holding hands, hearts floating above our heads. The paper had started to curl at the edges. For the first time in years, I took it down. I walked over to the cabinet where I kept old photographs, plastic bins labeled Rachel, Vacations, Christmas. I opened the one marked Rachel and sat cross-legged on the floor. Inside were dozens of snapshots. Rachel in a sunflower dress on her 5th birthday, Rachel holding her first trophy in 8th grade, Rachel at her wedding, beaming next to Derek, and me, always in the background, always holding something, a cake, a bouquet, a hand. That's what I'd done all my life, held things for others. It wasn't that I expected gratitude. At least that's what I told myself. But I suppose part of me believed that love, if given freely enough, would be returned. That kindness was like a savings account. You deposit over time and someday you withdraw. But what happens when the bank changes its locks? I picked up one photo. Rachel, 7 years old, dressed as a princess, hugging a giant stuffed bear I'd won for her at a county fair. On the back, in my handwriting, she said, "You're the best mommy in the whole world." The best mommy, now locked out. I reached for the old file folder I kept in the drawer below the bookshelf. Inside were all the financial documents I'd carefully maintained over the years. The money I'd gifted Rachel and Derek for their down payment. The car I'd helped pay off. The hospital bills I'd covered when Lily was born prematurely. There was even a notarized letter giving Rachel power of attorney for medical emergencies. I stared at that document the longest. Then, with slow certainty, I tore it in half, and again, until it was just a small pile of white confetti on the floor. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't sad, but because I'd already cried too many times in private. And this moment wasn't about sorrow anymore. It was about something else, something quieter, like the first crack of dawn after a long, dark night. This was the moment I realized I may have lost access to a house, but I hadn't lost access to myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not even my favorite chamomile blend or the lavender spray Rachel had gifted me 3 birthdays ago could calm my nerves. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one with the flattened cushion and fraying fabric, and stared into the dark. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like something had been scooped out of me. At 3:07 a.m., I walked into the kitchen and opened the cupboard above the sink. There, tucked in a plastic container, were the lemon cookies I always kept for Lily, her favorite. Every time she visited, she'd tiptoe in with messy braids and whisper, "Grandma, did the cookie fairy come?" And I'd pretend to be surprised, pretending I hadn't baked them just the night before. That ritual, small and silly, had felt sacred. Now the cookies sat there, stale and untouched. I took the lid off, inhaled the faint sweetness, then slowly poured them into the trash. The next morning, I pulled out my address book, yes, the paper one, and flipped through it. Most numbers belonged to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old colleagues, former neighbors, high school friends I exchanged Christmas cards with until we stopped pretending. I paused at one name, Claire Dawson, my sister's daughter. We weren't close, but she'd sent me a handwritten letter last year for Thanksgiving. Said she admired how I raised Rachel alone after my husband passed. I hadn't replied. I didn't think anyone truly meant that kind of thing, but now, maybe it was time to find out. I called. "Hello?" Her voice was groggy, kind. "Claire, it's Evelyn. I hope I'm not waking you." "Aunt Evelyn?" "No, not at all," she said, instantly brighter. "It's so good to hear your voice." I didn't know how to explain everything, so I didn't. I asked if I could come visit, just for a weekend. Oregon wasn't far. She hesitated for a split second, probably surprised, then said, "Of course, my guest room's always ready." It was a lifeline, a small rope thrown across a wide, dark ocean. After hanging up, I sat down and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a list. Things I'd do for myself. It was embarrassingly short at first. Make tea the way I like it. Wear the soft blue cardigan even if it's stained. Sleep in on Sundays. I added a few more, then circled one. Reclaim my time. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It wasn't even an apology. It was space. Space to breathe. To think. To remember who I was before I became the emergency contact, the babysitter, the fallback. I looked at the torn paper from the night before, still lying in a small heap near the bookshelf. It looked almost ceremonial now, like ashes from a letter you no longer needed to read. I stood, grabbed a dustpan, and swept it away. Sunday morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft stripes on the living room carpet. I sat with a cup of black tea, unsweetened, just the way I liked it when no one was around to ask if I was sure I didn't want honey. The silence had shifted since that night. Less like a wound, more like a companion. Not a kind one, but familiar. I pulled out the old filing box, the one with the cracked leather handle and the scent of cedar and thyme. Inside were carefully labeled envelopes, manila folders, and receipts that spanned decades of motherhood. Tuition payments, medical bills, checks with "For Rachel" scribbled in the memo lines. I ran my fingers over the edges of each paper like touching the rings inside a tree stump, layers of sacrifice only I remembered. I found a folded note tucked inside a pale blue envelope. Rachel must have written it when she was 14. I don't say it much. It read in blocky teenage scrawl, "But you're the strongest person I know. I want to be like you when I grow up." The ink had faded slightly, but not enough to erase the ache. Back then, I believed we'd always be close, that love would age like wine, deeper, fuller, better with time. But the love between mother and daughter wasn't always vintage. Sometimes it curdled like milk left too long in the sun. I kept reading. Tax returns that showed I claimed Rachel as a dependent well into her 20s. Receipts from the down payment I helped with on her first home. A notarized letter naming her my healthcare proxy, written back when I thought she'd never leave my side. How ironic that in trying to give her everything, I'd slowly disappeared. I came across a statement from 5 years ago, $15,000 transferred to their joint account to cover Derek's dental emergency. He never thanked me. Rachel called it a small help, nothing major. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. But now, with the weight of that torn-up power of attorney still lingering in my memory, it did. A phone buzz interrupted my spiral. A number I didn't recognize left a voicemail. I hesitated, then pressed play. "Hi, Evelyn. This is Lorraine. From the garden club, remember? I ran into Rachel last week. I'm not sure how to say this, but she mentioned you weren't feeling well mentally. That maybe you were getting confused about things. If there's anything I can do..." My spine stiffened. Confused? Not well? The words tasted like poison. Rachel wasn't just locking me out of her home. She was rewriting me, reframing me as unstable, unreliable, possibly even senile. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That's when the tear fell. Just one. Not for what Rachel had said, but for the years I spent believing I'd always be enough, that my worth would be self-evident, that love was its own protection. I wiped my cheek, picked up the pen beside my checkbook, and wrote a note to my attorney. Subject: full review of medical and financial documents. Immediate revocation of all family powers granted. Initiate trust restructuring. I signed it with a steady hand. For the first time in years, the paper I held wasn't evidence of what I'd given away. It was proof of what I was reclaiming. I hadn't expected Lorraine's call to linger the way it did, but that night, her voice replayed in my mind like a haunting refrain. "Rachel said you weren't feeling well mentally." The phrasing wasn't casual. It was calculated, designed to plant doubt. Not just in others, but in me. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the reflection that had raised a child, buried a husband, worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Wrinkles carved across my cheeks like maps of old battles, and yet behind those tired eyes, I still knew myself. I was not confused. I was not fragile. I was not invisible. I pulled out a notebook from the dresser drawer. The one where I used to jot down recipes and to-do lists. Now it would serve a different purpose. My ledger of truth. What I gave. I began listing, not out of spite, but as a reckoning. Not for her, but for me. Covered Rachel's rent for 2 years after college. paid for her nursing license courses after she quit pre-med, took care of Lily during postpartum while Rachel slept through the day, bought Lily's first bed, stroller, car seat, loaned money for Rachel and Derek's second honeymoon, gave up a trip to Italy when Rachel called, crying, needing help with Lily's daycare. I paused. My hand cramped. My heart didn't. On the next page, I wrote another title, What I Lost. Birthdays spent alone. The garden I never planted. Friends I stopped calling. Books I never finished. Dinners I skipped to babysit. Pieces of myself I never claimed back. Tears didn't fall this time. Not because the pain was gone, but because the numbness had grown teeth. That afternoon, I called Claire again. "Hi, Aunt Evelyn," she answered warmly. "Would you mind if I sent over some documents to your address, just for safekeeping?" She didn't ask why. She just said, "Of course." That single gesture felt like a lifeboat in a storm. Someone believed me without suspicion, without condition. Later, I made one more call, this time to a woman named Shirley, my lawyer's assistant. "I'd like to make an appointment to restructure my trust," I said, "and to rescind a medical proxy granted to my daughter." There was a beat of silence. "Understood, Ms. Hart. We'll handle it right away." I hung up, breathing slower, stronger. Outside, wind stirred the hydrangeas by the window. For years, I'd trimmed those bushes to perfection because Rachel hated messy gardens. But maybe messy was okay. Maybe messy meant alive. I opened the back door and walked into the yard. No gloves, no clippers, just bare hands and bare feet. I knelt, dug my fingers into the earth, and yanked a stubborn weed from the soil. It came loose easily. Some things do, once you stop pretending they belong. That evening, I found myself holding a small, dusty wooden box I hadn't opened in over a decade. It sat on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, hidden behind a stack of winter scarves. I carried it to the kitchen table, the way one might carry a fragile heirloom, and sat down beneath the warm glow of the overhead light. The lock on the box had long since rusted, but the lid creaked open with a gentle tug. Inside were relics of a life I hadn't touched in years. Letters from my late husband, sweet, awkward, funny little notes he used to leave in my lunch bag when I still worked at the public library. Photographs of a much younger me, holding a newborn Rachel in my lap, beaming like I'd won something precious. I had a silver bracelet, my mother's brooch, and at the very bottom, folded carefully, was a page from a journal. My handwriting. Sometimes I wonder if Rachel will ever know just how much I've given up for her. Not in bitterness, but in quiet acceptance. I only hope she never has to sacrifice like this, because it is a kind of loneliness no one prepares you for. I touched the paper gently, like I was afraid it might shatter. I wasn't prepared for this loneliness either, the kind that isn't caused by distance, but by being unneeded, unseen, undesired. That's when the doorbell rang. It startled me. At this hour, unannounced visitors were rare. I approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. It was Nate, Rachel's husband. I hesitated, then opened the door halfway. "Evelyn," he said, "can we talk?" His face wasn't cruel. It wasn't apologetic either. It was anxious. "I know things have gotten messy. Rachel's been under a lot of pressure. The job, Lily, everything." I said nothing. He looked down at the porch as if the words were written on the doormat. "She didn't mean to cut you off like that. She was just overwhelmed." A pause. "I think she regrets it. She's just too proud to say it." I studied him. The man I once trusted to care for my daughter, the father of my only grandchild, and now a messenger in a storm he helped create. "Did she send you?" I asked. He hesitated too long. "No," I said. "She didn't. You came because you thought you could fix it." He nodded slowly. "I'm not something broken, Nate, and neither is Rachel. But there are cracks between us now that a conversation won't seal." He looked genuinely unsure whether to step forward or retreat. I didn't close the door. I didn't invite him in either. "I'll always love Lily," I said softly, "but I'm not a placeholder. I'm not a tool to be used and stored away, though." He opened his mouth to speak, but thought better of it. "I'll let you know if I'm ever ready to talk, I said. Then I gently closed the door. Not as a punishment, but as a boundary. Not everything that knocks deserves to be let in. The following morning began without drama, without texts, without doorbells. Just silence and the steady hum of my kettle. I took comfort in its predictability, in the soft whistle that had accompanied me for over 2 decades. That kettle had boiled water through sicknesses, birthdays, sleepless nights, and lonely afternoons. Today, it boiled for me. After breakfast, I opened my laptop, an old dented thing with keys that stuck if you typed too fast, and typed out an email to Shirley, my lawyer's assistant. Subject, trust restructuring, urgent follow-up. I detailed what I wanted. A new trust. One that excluded Rachel and Derek entirely. I asked that my assets, what little there were, be directed to Lily, through a controlled account managed by Claire. I made it clear, no direct access, no way for Rachel to interfere. I also requested a formal letter revoking the previously granted power of attorney, a clean legal line in the sand. I hit send. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Next, I drove to the bank. It wasn't a planned stop. I hadn't even changed out of my old cardigan, but something inside me urged it, like I needed to see my name on something official again. The teller was a young woman with kind eyes and chipped nail polish. She asked for my ID, then smiled warmly. "Oh, Mrs. Hart, you've been with us a long time. My grandma always said you used to help her pick books at the library, said you had the softest voice." I blinked. I hadn't expected recognition, let alone kindness. "I remember her," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. She loved historical fiction. The young woman laughed. "Still does. Reads with a magnifier now, though." We talked briefly, and then I requested a full summary of all my accounts. I sat at one of the private cubicles and reviewed every line. I made a few changes. Closed a joint savings account I once opened for family emergencies, transferred balances, updated my beneficiaries. It wasn't about the money, it was about the message. My life belongs to me now. As I signed the final form, the young teller said, "You're really organized. I hope I'm like that when I'm older." I smiled. "Just make sure no one else writes your story for you." On the way home, I stopped at a bookstore. Not one of the big chains, but the little corner shop I'd passed for years but never entered. The air inside smelled like old pages and lemon wax. I let my fingers drift across the spines of novels, journals, cookbooks. A quiet joy stirred. I picked a small cloth-bound journal with a red ribbon bookmark. On the cover, in gold leaf, were the words, "My life, my way." That night, I began my first entry. Today, I began to redraw the lines, not to push people away, but to stop erasing myself. My love isn't gone. It's just no longer free. I spent the next few days in quiet rearrangement, not of furniture, but of my thoughts. Each morning, I sat by the window with a pen and that red journal, recording what I remembered about myself before I became a utility. I wrote about my favorite books, the sound of rain on the library roof, how I used to collect pressed flowers and old encyclopedias. I even listed things I hadn't dared to admit aloud, that I once wanted to move to Santa Fe, learn pottery, dye my hair crimson red. Midweek, Claire called. "I got the documents, Aunt Evelyn," she said. "I read every page, and I just want you to know you're doing something incredibly brave." Carino, it caught me off guard. Brave? I hadn't thought of it like that. Mostly, I just felt tired. But Claire continued, "I remember once, when I was 8, you brought me to the art museum. I spilled grape juice on your white coat and started crying. You told me, 'It's just a coat. You're worth more than clean fabric.' I've never forgotten that." I couldn't speak for a second. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you, sweetheart," I managed. "That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while. Not because I was sad, but because something unfamiliar was blooming inside me, the realization that maybe, just maybe, someone had seen me after all. That evening, I ran into Lorraine at the farmer's market. She was buying blueberries, sunglasses perched on her head like always. "Evelyn," she said, clearly surprised. "You look, well?" "I am well. I replied, not as a defense, but as a fact. She hesitated, then leaned closer. I hope you don't mind what I said on the voicemail. Rachel she made it sound like you weren't yourself lately. I looked her straight in the eye. Lorraine, let me be clear. I am more myself now than I have been in years. Her expression faltered. I just thought maybe something was wrong. She said you tore up your documents, that you're acting erratic. I nodded slowly. I did tear them up. The ones that gave my daughter power over my life. That's not erratic. It's freedom. Lorraine blinked. She didn't know how to respond. That was fine. I didn't need her to. I bought my strawberries, waved politely, and walked away. On the drive home, I passed the community center. A small sign outside caught my eye. Story Circle. Share your life. Inspire others. Thursdays at 6 p.m. I pulled into the lot impulsively. The place was empty, just one staff member tidying up. I asked about the program. It's for seniors, mostly, she said. We sit in a circle, tell stories from our lives. Funny ones, hard ones, all of it. You should come. I said I'd think about it, but the truth was, I'd already decided maybe it was time to tell my story out loud. Not the version edited to please others. The real one. The version where I am not only mother or grandmother or forgotten matriarch, but Evelyn Hart, a woman with a voice of her own. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of hesitant sunlight that made everything look softer than it was. I parked outside the community center, heart thumping like I was about to take a final exam. It had been years since I'd spoken in front of anyone, let alone about myself. Inside, the room was small and warm, filled with mismatched chairs in a loose circle. About a dozen people milled about, most of them my age or older. Some clutched notebooks, others just sat quietly, waiting. A woman named June introduced herself as the moderator. "This isn't therapy," she said with a kind smile, "but it might feel like it sometimes. We're here to witness each other. That's all." When it was my turn, I didn't plan to speak much, just my name, maybe a simple anecdote. But as I looked around the room, faces open, expectant, gentle, something unlocked. "My name is Evelyn Hart," I began, "and for most of my life, I've been a helper." Heads nodded. I raised a daughter on my own. I worked full-time. I gave and gave until giving was the only language I knew. I thought love meant always saying yes. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with power. And then one day, I said no. The room was still. I said no to watching my granddaughter just for one weekend because I had a doctor's appointment. My daughter stopped speaking to me, changed the locks, told people I was confused. A few people gasped quietly. June gave a soft nod, encouraging me to continue. I thought I would fall apart, that I would break in half from the shame of being discarded. But something unexpected happened. I looked down at my hands. I began to remember myself. Not the mother, not the grandmother, just me. The girl who loved art museums, the woman who read poetry in the bathtub, the human being who deserves peace, even without applause. I hadn't meant to cry, but there it was. A warm, slow tear sliding down my cheek. Someone across the room murmured, "Yes," like a prayer. Afterward, people came up to me one by one. A woman named Carol squeezed my hand. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't," she whispered. Another, named Victor, told me, "My son hasn't called me in 8 years. Tonight you helped me breathe again." I walked out into the night air feeling taller somehow. Not because I'd solved anything, not because Rachel had apologized, but because I had spoken, because I had stopped hiding my story behind everyone else's needs. As I drove home, a voicemail popped up. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to listen. It was Lily. "Hi, Grandma. Mommy says you're really busy and can't come over anymore, but I miss you. I hope your knee is better. I saved a purple crayon for you. Love you." Her voice was small, hopeful, honest. I pulled the car over and held the steering wheel like it might fly away. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "I miss you too," into the silence, knowing the words might never reach her, but needing to say them anyway. I listened to Lily's voicemail 3 more times that night, each word curled around my heart like soft fingers tugging at old threads. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound coached and just confused. The way only children can be when love suddenly disappears without explanation. I didn't call back. Not yet. I didn't trust that Rachel wouldn't intercept it, twist it, or worse, use it to hurt Lily. The next morning, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The email from Shirley had arrived. All updates to the trust confirmed, power of attorney revoked, Rachel officially removed as a beneficiary. Attached were PDFs and final notarized letters, all legally sound and binding. I downloaded them, printed 1 copy for my records, and filed it in a new folder labeled Evelyn, Personal. It was the first time I'd created something just for me in years. By noon, another call came. It was Nate again. "Evelyn, I know you're upset. Rachel is too, but this is getting out of hand. She heard about the changes to the trust. She's devastated." I stayed quiet. He continued, "She's worried you're acting irrationally. She's talking to someone about having you evaluated." There it was, the unspoken threat finally given a name. "You mean declared mentally unfit?" I said flatly. There was a pause. "It's not what she wants. She's just concerned." My heart beat like a war drum in my ears, not from fear, but from clarity. "Nate," I said, "I have been clear, rational, and careful. I have consulted a lawyer, acted within my rights, and taken steps to protect myself. If your wife tries to legally challenge me based on false claims, I'll respond appropriately." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I simply stated fact. "We don't want it to go there," he said softer. "Then don't take it there." I hung up. For a moment, I felt something almost like regret. Not for what I'd done, but for how predictable it had all become. The gaslighting, the narrative flipping, the idea that a woman with boundaries must be losing her mind. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a novel I'd meant to read for years but never had the time. The Secret Scripture. As I flipped through the first pages, I thought about how easily women were written off as hysterical, unstable, emotional. Especially women who said no. Especially women who stopped serving. Especially women like me. That night, I lit a candle and played a record I hadn't touched since the 90s. Ella Fitzgerald's voice drifting through the room like silk. I poured a glass of red wine, took a long sip, and whispered aloud to the empty house, "I am not confused." Then I laughed. Not bitterly, not sarcastically, just freely. Because for the first time, I wasn't explaining myself to anyone. 2 days passed without a single call or message. No legal threats, no late-night apologies, just an eerie quiet, as if Rachel and Nate were regrouping, drafting their next move. But I didn't wait for it. I had other plans. I walked into the local library, my old workplace, wearing the same navy cardigan I used to wear during story hour. The moment I stepped through the glass doors, something inside me realigned. The scent of old paper, the hush of whispering pages. It all felt like coming home. Maya, the new head librarian, greeted me with a smile. She looked maybe 30, quick on her feet and already juggling a box of returns when she saw me. "Mrs. Hart, you're a legend here." I laughed. "A legend for what? Reorganizing the Dewey Decimal System during flu season?" She beamed. "That's exactly the story they tell." We spoke for a while. I told her I wasn't looking for a job, just to volunteer, maybe help with children's programs, literacy outreach. Her face lit up. "Our Saturday story circle could use a voice like yours. Most of the kids don't have grandparents nearby. It would mean a lot." Something stirred deep in my chest. A hollow space gently filling. "I'd love to." Back home, I pulled out a small drawer where I kept my stationery and found a faded card, cream-colored with silver edges. It was a thank you note Rachel had written years ago, after I helped with Lily's first birthday party. "You made everything perfect, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you. the words didn't hurt anymore. They just didn't fit anymore. I tucked the card into a box labeled "Let Go." Later that evening, Claire called again. This time, her voice carried a mix of nerves and excitement. "Aunt Evelyn, I've been thinking, you ever consider visiting Oregon longer than just a weekend? I mean, really visiting?" I paused. I hadn't allowed myself that kind of thought yet. "Maybe," I said. "Why?" "Well, I've got space. A guest suite. And there's a women's cooperative out here looking for folks to teach basic literacy to migrant workers. I thought of you." The idea landed in my chest like a stone in still water. Not a splash. A shift. Teaching again. Reading stories. Building something small but sacred. "I'd need time to think," I replied. "Take all the time you need," Claire said. "Just know, you'd be wanted. Not needed. Wanted." After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the street where Rachel used to ride her bike, where I once taught her how to plant tulips. All of it's still there, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Not in a bitter way, in a freeing one. Some places become altars to who we were. Others become invitations to who we could still be. That night, I wrote one more list in my red journal. What I am, with or without them. A woman who gave love freely. A woman who stopped apologizing for needing rest. A woman who can start again, even at 63. A woman no longer afraid to leave. I spent that Friday morning packing, not to leave just yet, but to prepare, to see what I could take if I chose to go. Not much, I realized. A few books, the red journal, the blue cardigan, some photographs. The rest, furniture, dishes, keepsakes, felt heavy with a life I was no longer carrying forward. While sorting through the guest room closet, I came across a shoebox. Inside were drawings Lily had made over the years. A turkey traced from her tiny hand, a house with smoke puffing from the chimney labeled Grandma's Home, and one particularly crumpled piece with crooked block letters. "I love you more than cupcakes." My chest clenched. How do you leave a place filled with this kind of love, even if the doors have closed? That evening, I sat on the porch sipping chamomile tea when a letter arrived, an actual envelope, hand-addressed in Rachel's unmistakable handwriting. My name written too forcefully, too sharp, like she'd been gripping the pen too tightly. I held it for a while before opening it. The first line hit hard. "You've embarrassed me." It went on, accusations, veiled threats, disappointment masked as concern. She mentioned the trust changes, the library volunteering, the performative independence. She ended the letter with a sentence that lodged in my throat like glass. "I don't know who you are anymore." I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the "let go" box without reading it a second time. Because here's the thing. She was right. She didn't know who I was anymore, because I was no longer the woman who dropped everything at the first ring of the phone. I was no longer the bandage for her stress, the buffer between her life and its natural consequences. I was becoming someone new, or maybe just reclaiming the parts of me she never bothered to learn. That night, I drafted an email to Claire. Subject, Oregon. Let's talk dates. I'm ready to see what comes next. I didn't press send. Not yet, but it was there, waiting. As I closed my laptop, the doorbell rang. For a split second, my heart jumped. Part of me expected Lily, her little face peeking through the window, asking about lemon cookies. But it wasn't her. It was Lorraine. She held a small Tupperware container and looked sheepish. "I made too much stew," she said. "Thought you might want some." I blinked, then stepped aside. "Come in." We didn't talk about Rachel. We didn't talk about trust documents or parenting failures or mental evaluations. We just sat, two older women, two bowls of stew, a quiet kindness humming between us. And as the evening wore on, I realized sometimes healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it knocks softly, with stew. I hadn't planned to check my voicemail that night, but something about the quiet after Lorraine left, so warm, so unexpectedly nourishing, made me feel ready. Ready to hear whatever waited on the other side of that digital line. I pressed play. It was Lily. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered. Her voice wobbled in the way children's voices do when they've been rehearsed, but still don't understand. "Mommy says you're busy, that you're taking a break, but I miss you. I colored a picture for you. It's us at the zoo. Remember the monkeys? You laughed so loud, I have it on the fridge." A pause. "I saved a purple crayon for when you come back, okay? Bye. Love you." I sat completely still, phone pressed to my chest like it could carry warmth. Her voice, the same one that used to squeal at butterflies and bedtime stories, rippled through me like wind in a still pond. It didn't matter that Rachel had probably approved that call, or maybe even scripted it, because the ache in Lily's voice was real, the confusion, the reaching. I didn't call her back. I didn't trust that the line would be private. But I knew then, with unwavering certainty, that my relationship with Lily would not be dictated by Rachel's moods. It would exist in postcards, in memories, in whatever small channels I could find. That weekend, I went to the art store. I hadn't touched paint in years, but I bought watercolors, thick textured paper, and a new set of brushes. At home, I sat by the window and began sketching from memory. Lily's face at the zoo, her eyes wide, cheeks freckled with sunlight. I painted the monkeys in the background, even added the balloon she'd dropped that floated into a tree. I added a note in the corner. I still laugh when I think of that day. It wasn't much, but it was something I could send. A thread of continuity, a reminder that love doesn't vanish. It changes form. As I let the painting dry, the doorbell rang again. This time it was a delivery. Flowers, not the usual bouquet. Wildflowers, a chaotic, joyful mix. No note, but I knew who sent them. Claire. I texted her that night. "Me, I think I'm ready to come, just for a visit. Maybe longer." Claire. "The guest room is made. There's tea in the cabinet, and I've been dying to try your chicken pot pie." I smiled, then stared at the ceiling. Oregon, a different coastline, a different rhythm. The idea no longer felt drastic. It felt overdue. Later that night, I walked outside. The stars were dull from the city lights, but one blinked stubbornly through. I made no wishes, just a quiet promise to myself. I will not shrink again. Not for guilt, not for comfort, not even for love. I mailed the painting the next morning, carefully packaged between cardboard sheets so it wouldn't bend. No return address, just Lily's name written in soft cursive and a sticker of a smiling sun in the corner. It felt like something sacred, like slipping a message into a bottle and trusting the tide. Afterward, I packed my small travel bag, 3 outfits, my journal, a framed photo of Lily from her 3rd birthday, and a worn paperback I'd meant to finish for years. I didn't pack much because I didn't need much. I was no longer preparing to fill someone else's world. I was stepping into my own. The ride to the train station was quiet. I didn't play music. I just watched the trees blur past and let the silence keep me company. At the terminal, I ordered a hot tea and found a bench by the window. The train wouldn't arrive for another 40 minutes, but I liked the stillness. It reminded me that transition wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered. While I waited, I received a text. "Rachel, I heard you're going to Oregon. Is that necessary?" No greeting, no softness, just control, repackaged as concern. I stared at the message. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. No reply. She didn't need access to me right now. Not my plans, not my energy, not my peace. Instead, I sent a voice memo to Claire. "Train's on time. I'll see you by dinner." Her reply came instantly. "Can't wait. I made your pot pie recipe. Hope it's as good as yours." I smiled and closed my eyes for a moment. I wasn't running. I wasn't retreating. I was expanding. Beyond the role of mother, beyond the tight loop of obligation I'd mistaken for purpose. The train arrived with a low hum. I boarded, found my window seat, and tucked the bag beneath my legs. As the landscape began to shift, I pulled out my journal and wrote, "This is the sound of my life turning a page. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with clarity. And I get to write what comes next." 3 hours into the journey, the conductor walked past with a clipboard and a kind smile. "You headed to Salem, ma'am?" "Yes," I replied. "Lovely place. Big trees. Big hearts." I nodded. "That's exactly what I need." Outside the window, the world turned greener, fuller, less concrete, more breath. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder what Rachel was thinking. I didn't brace for her anger or mourn her silence. I just existed, fully, quietly, undeniably mine. Claire met me at the train station with a hug that felt like exhaling. No questions, no awkward tiptoeing around the subject of Rachel, just, "You look radiant," and a warm smile that pulled me into her car like I belonged there. Her home sat on the edge of a wooded grove, sunlight spilling through tall pines and dappling the driveway. It smelled like earth and citrus and something freshly baked. Comfort, in other words. "You hungry?" she asked as we stepped inside. "I could eat," I smiled. Dinner was simple. Chicken pot pie, a salad, and a bottle of wine already opened. We ate at the kitchen island barefoot, jazz humming in the background. I couldn't remember the last time a meal felt like presence rather than performance. Later that evening, Claire showed me to the guest room. The bed was already turned down. On the nightstand sat a vase of wildflowers, a book of poetry, and a handwritten note. "Rest isn't a reward. You've earned this. Every breath of it." I closed the door, stood in the middle of the room, and just breathed. The next morning, I walked through the small town on my own. It had a single coffee shop, a used bookstore, and a community bulletin board filled with flyers, pottery workshops, yoga for beginners, forest hikes. One in particular caught my eye. Volunteers needed adult literacy program, help someone find their voice. I took the tab with the contact number. When I returned to Claire's, she was in the garden pruning herbs. I told her about the flyer. "You'd be perfect for that," she said. Something in me lit up. Small, quiet, but undeniably alive. That afternoon, I received a package. No return address, but I knew it was from Lily. Inside was a drawing, me and her, side by side, holding what looked like ice cream cones under a rainbow. At the bottom, "Grandma, I still have the purple crayon. I didn't use it. It's waiting for you." I sat down, heart thudding. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, it was a thread. Delicate, unbreakable. I picked up a blank postcard and began to write. "I got your picture. It made me smile bigger than any ice cream ever could. Tell the purple crayon I say hello. Love always, Grandma." I sealed it, sent it, and let it be enough. The first day at the Literacy Center felt like stepping into an unwritten chapter of my life. The building was humble, a converted church with mismatched chairs and donated books lining sagging shelves. But inside, there was something sacred about the way people sat in quiet concentration, pencil tips tapping, brows furrowed in hope. I was assigned to a woman named Carmen, 52, recently divorced, working 2 jobs and learning to read for the first time in her life. Her eyes were sharp, her hands calloused, her voice low but steady. She reminded me of myself, not in circumstance, but in sheer will. We met every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. At first we read signs, bathroom, exit, danger, then recipes, then news articles. One day she brought a birthday card her daughter had given her. She'd never read it before. She asked me to help. The message inside was simple. "You are the strongest woman I know. Thank you for never giving up on me." Carmen cried. So did I. Later that week, Claire and I took a walk through the forest trail behind her house. The trees were thick, the path soft under our shoes, the air filled with the scent of pine and wet moss. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. "I think I might stay," I said finally, just above a whisper. Claire smiled. "I think you already have." That night, I opened my red journal again and turned to a fresh page. Who I am now. A reader of poems, not just bedtime stories. A volunteer. A voice in a circle, not just an echo down a hallway. A woman with scars that no longer sting. A grandmother still. Just from a distance for now. I didn't write Rachel's name, not because she was gone from my heart, but because she no longer defined its beat. There was still grief, yes, but it lived beside something gentler now, something like acceptance. The next morning, I mailed another postcard to Lily. This time, I included a pressed flower, lavender from Claire's garden, and wrote, "Every time I smell this, I think of you laughing at the monkeys. I'll always be close, even if it's just through postcards and crayons. Love, Grandma." No promises, no guilt, just presence, in the form I was allowed to give it, and that was enough, for now. Spring settled into Oregon like a balm, slow and gentle, coaxing color from every corner. The trees outside Claire's kitchen window bloomed with pale pink blossoms, and the air smelled faintly of wet soil and renewal. I'd been in her home for nearly 2 months, but something about this week made the change feel permanent. Not in a loud, life-altering way, but like a door that quietly closed behind you when you weren't watching. One morning, while slicing strawberries for breakfast, Claire handed me an envelope. "It came to my address," she said softly. "From Rachel." I took it without opening it. The paper felt heavier than its size should allow. "She didn't include a return address," Claire added. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the envelope in my lap like it might bite. Eventually, I opened it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd said, what she'd done, just a single page written in her careful, measured script. "Lily misses you. I think about that a lot. I'm not ready to talk, but I'm not angry anymore. Just trying to figure things out." No signature, no closure. But it wasn't cruel. And for Rachel, that was something. I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal, not the section titled "Let Go," but a new one. Maybe. 2 days later, I returned to the literacy center and found Carmen waiting for me with a small wrapped package. "I made this," she said. "Wanted to say thank you." Inside was a bookmark, hand-stitched with tiny flowers and the word "guide." And the fabric was uneven, the thread knotted in places, but it was beautiful. More than that, it was evidence of transformation, of her effort, her ownership, just like mine. That evening, Claire and I sat on the porch with our mugs of tea. "You ever think you'll go back?" she asked. "To California?" I shook my head. "Not for a while. Maybe not ever." "What about Rachel?" I took a long breath. "We may find our way back to each other, or we may not. But either way, I'm not standing still waiting." Claire reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "I like who you are when you're not waiting," she said. So did I. That night, I wrote one final list in my journal. What I've reclaimed. My time, my boundaries, my laughter, my voice. My right to choose how I am loved and how I give love in return. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was real. And more importantly, it was mine.